we Hello, everybody. This is Empowering Democracy. I'm your host, Joe Firestone. I'm joined by my friend, Bibi Pierce,
Happy
the
to be here.
host, the host of Around the World with Dee and Friends. Thank you, Dee. Our topics for tonight are Bibi's dream, the end of Syria, and Trump and trade deficits. Those may seem like mysterious topics to you, but as we get started, they will become less and less mysterious. And Lana's here. Hi, Lana. And Steve Wolfbrand is here too. Steve says, hello, everybody. And Steve
Hello.
says, hi, Lana. And hi, Steve. Glad you're here. There are a number of other people here too, but they're probably on Twitter, so they have not announced themselves. So, we're going to move to the first of our articles.
And I would say to Joe, share. Just make sure you share and everybody shares.
Right. Share, like, and subscribe, everyone. Of course. But
Yes, I'm sharing right now.
I will share the screen meanwhile. Here's an article from uns.com by Mike Whitney. Has Bibi achieved his dream of obliterating the Arab world? Provocative title. This one was offered on December 14th, 2024. It's a pretty long one. Gives this map of Syria, who controls what in Syria. That is from December 8th. Okay, we're on December 8th. And this is the map that breaks up Syria into various groups. And you see the green is the Syria opposition fighters prior to November 27th. I was always puzzled by this particular. Well, then there are areas Syrian opposition fire captured since November 27th. And up here, there are Turkish, where my cursor is, Turkish forces, and all through here are Kurdish forces. The gray area represents ISIL and ISIS forces, which supposedly are still there. Oh, the ACO was not just Turkish forces, but Turkish aligned Syrian rebel forces. And then, of course, there's the Israeli-occupied Golan Heights. But they're mysterious about what the white means. And I have to think the Syrian opposition forces were also forces that gained the white areas. even though the legend, doesn't indicate that. Now, the Israelis are supposed to have gone in here into the Kunitra area and are now within 20 miles of Damascus. So that's not clearly shown on this. So Mike says, take a look at the map above. It explains everything. This is roughly the situation on the ground today. The majority, today, that was as of 3 days ago, the majority of Syria's landmass is controlled by 5 groups. Al-Qaeda, also known as HTS, the Kurds, they're the Syrian Democratic Forces, or the SDF, the IDF, which is, of course, the Israeli Defense Forces, the Turks, and remnants of the Syrian Army, the SAA, because it's called the Syrian Arab Army. Of course, the situation is extremely fluid, so some of the territory is likely to change hands in the near future as rival groups fight among themselves. But here's what won't change. The government will not emerge that is capable of stitching together a unified, contiguous, viable, centrally governed Syrian state. That's not going to happen. The various armies are too powerful for any one group to crush the others and reestablish a government that rules all of Syria's previously controlled territory. Why does that matter? Excuse me. Because we need to acknowledge that Israel has accomplished what it sought from the very beginning. They not only enlisted allies to help them topple Assad, but they also obliterated the Syrian state. Syria's gone. It no longer exists. And that has been Israel's goal for more than 40 years. So we shouldn't view the events of the last week as random or spontaneous, because they are neither. Everything that has taken place aligns closely with a strategic blueprint produced by a Zionist intellectual by the name of Odad Yinan more than 4 decades ago, in which, according to the biographer Israel Shahak, concocted, quote, an accurate and detailed plan for the Middle East, which is based on the division of the whole area into small states and the dissolution of all the existing Arab states, full stop. This is where readers need to pause for a moment and honestly consider whether this accurately explains the endless fighting we've seen in the Middle East for the last 2 decades. The answer is it does. Iraq, Libya, Lebanon, Syria, etc. These are not just countries. They are agenda items on a Zionist checklist for regional domination. So stop thinking that the wars have something to do with the Assad or oil or pipelines or Hamas or even Israeli security, because they don't. These are wars aimed at establishing Israeli hegemony across the Middle East. Let's look at the document itself, which is titled "The Strategy for Israel in the 1980s" by Oded Yinan. The Muslim Arab world is built into a temporary house of cards put together by foreigners without the wishes and desires of the inhabitants having been taken account. This, of course, is a reference to the cutting up of the Middle East by the Sykes-Picot Agreement, I believe in 1918. Every Arab Muslim state nowadays faces ethnic, social destruction from within. And in some, civil war is already raging. All the Arab states east of Israel are torn apart, broken up, and riddled with conflict. The national ethnic minority picture extending from um, uh, 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 um, 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 Morocco to India, and from Somalia to Turkey points to the absence of stability and a rapid degeneration in the entire region. When this picture is added to the economic one, we see how the entire region is built like a house of cards, unable to withstand its severe problems. And this is from A Strategy for Israel in the 1980s by Oded Bayonon from VoltaireNet. I guess VoltaireNet was a publication of that time. And here is Syria being cut by, I guess that's Turkey and the US, okay, and Israel. I'm not sure what that other red knife is. It might be the flag of, I don't know, it might be the flag of Iran. This graphic was done by Latuf 2024 in MinPress News. So in the opening paragraphs, the author identifies the vulnerabilities within the current societies that can be exploited for Israel's strategic advantage. The focus, of course, is on, quote, ethnic minorities, unquote, that can be excited to exacerbate existing divisions within the society in order to weaken the larger body politic leading to regime change. Here's the kicker, quote, the Western Front is in fact less complicated than the Eastern Front, but Lebanon's total dissolution into 5 provinces serves as a precedent for the entire Arab world. The dissolution of Syria and Iraq later on into ethnically or religiously unique areas such as Lebanon is Israel's primary target on the Eastern Front in the long run, while the dissolution of the military power of those states serves as the primary short-term target. Syria will fall apart in accordance with its ethnic and religious structure into several states, such as in present-day Lebanon, so that there will be Shiite Alawite state along its coast, the Sunni state in Damascus, hostile to its northern neighbor, and the Druzes, who will set up a state, maybe even in our Golan, and certainly in the Haran and the northern part of Jordan. This state of affairs will be the guarantee for peace and security in the area in the long run, and that aim is already within our reach today. And this was again another quote from Oded Bayonon. Repeat, quote, this state of affairs will be the guarantee for peace and security in the area in the long run, unquote. In other words, inciting ethnic and religious violence against other groups within the society is the operational strategy for achieving regional dominance. In order to establish Israeli security, Arabs must be encouraged to kill each other. Are we clear about that? Regarding the Palestinians, there's this little nugget, another quote from A Strategy for Israel in the 1980s. Genuine coexistence and peace will reign over the land only when the Arabs understand that without Jewish rule between the Jordan and the sea, they will have neither existence nor security. A nation of their own and security will be theirs only in Jordan. I don't know if this is currently coming to pass. Supposedly, there were reports of a coup in Jordan today, he details me. Keep in mind, this was written in 1982, which means that among the politicos in Netanyahu's party, there was never intention of exchanging land for peace or fulfilling their obligations under U.S. Resolution 242 to evacuate the occupied territories. It was always a ruse aimed at confusing credulous nitwits in the U.S. Economist Jeffrey Sachs has confirmed much of which we stated here. He's recently been outspoken in a number of interviews on YouTube where he has laid blame for all the recent wars in the Middle East on Benjamin Netanyahu. Here's Sachs in a recent piece at Consortium News. Unquote, quote, the fall of Syria this week is the culmination of the Israel-U.S. campaign against Syria that goes back to 1996 with Netanyahu's arrival in office as prime minister. The Israel-U.S. war on Syria escalated in 2011 and 2012 when former U.S. President Barack Obama covertly tasked the CIA with the overthrow of the Syrian government in Operation Timber Sycamore. Syria's fall came swiftly because of more than a decade of crushing economic sanctions. The burdens of war, I wouldn't call it swiftly since it took a decade, but the burdens of war, the U.S. seizure of Syria's oil, and most immediately Israel's attacks on Hezbollah, Netanyahu's ambition to transform the region through war, which dates back almost 3 decades, is playing out in front of our eyes. Continuing with this long quote from Jeffrey Sachs, the long history of Israel's campaign to overthrow the Syrian government is not widely understood, yet the documentary record is clear. Israel's war on Syria began with the U.S. and Israeli neoconservatives in 1996, who fashioned the, quote, clean break, unquote, strategy for the Middle East for Netanyahu as he came to office. The core of the, quote, clean break, unquote, strategy called for the Israel and the U.S. to reject, quote, land for peace, unquote, the idea that Israel would withdraw from the occupied Palestinian lands in return for peace. Going on with that long quote, Netanyahu's strategy was integrated into U.S. foreign policy. Taking out Syria was always a key part of the plan. This was confirmed by General Wesley Clark after 9/11. The role of the Israeli lobby is spelled out in Ilan Pappé's new book, Lobbying for Zionism on Both Sides of the Atlantic. The U.S. has now, we're still continuing with this long quote, the U.S. has by now led or sponsored wars against Iraq, invasion in 2003, Lebanon, U.S. funding and arming Israel, also Libya, NATO bombing in 2011, Syria, CIA operation during the 2010s, Sudan supporting rebels to break Sudan apart in 2011, and Somalia backing Ethiopia's invasion in 2006. A prospective U.S. war with Iran, ardently sought by Israel, is still pending. The U.S. and Israel are high-fiving, that they have successfully wrecked yet another adversary of Israel and defender of the Palestinian cause, with Netanyahu claiming, quote, credit for starting the historic process. And going on further, American interference at the behest of Netanyahu's Israel has left the Middle East in ruins with over 1 million dead and open wars raging in Libya, Sudan, Somalia, Lebanon, Syria, and Palestine, and with Iran on the brink of a nuclear arsenal being pushed against its own inclinations to this eventuality. This was all from U.S. and Israel destroyed Syria and called it peace, which is an article we read and analyzed here a few streams ago, if you recall. That article was originally published in Consortium News, but we picked it up at the UN's Review. And here is a map, and we see here the partition of Syria, the area under the Turkish flag, is the area where the Turks and the Syrian opposition forces would be likely to dominate. The area under the American flag is where the Kurds are likely to dominate. And the area under the Israeli flag is where the Israelis are likely to dominate. And you notice that the city of Homs is in there, and the city of Damascus is in there. And so this map is projecting a very large area that will be brought under Israeli control as a result of the wars that are going on right now and the Israeli invasion of Syria. Don't know how sound this news I'm about to give you is, but according to Mahmoud OD, there is currently a serious effort, an intense effort at producing a ceasefire in Gaza that reportedly would involve the withdrawal of all Israeli troops from Gaza. After the intense efforts to destroy Gaza and empty it of the Palestinians, one wonders why the Israelis would be attempting to negotiate that if the reports are true. And one might conclude, well, they might want to negotiate that because they want to free up all their troops to march into Syria and to take the area that we've marked off on this map and bring it under control, of Israel. By the way, that area also allows them alternate routes other than from the south to make an attack eventually, on Lebanon and to destroy that state. But going on, these are Israel's wars, and they're prosecuted to pursue Israeli interests and not American interests. The U.S. military and political class has been hijacked by the maneuverings of strong-arm lobbyists who know how to work the levers of power to achieve their own ends. Their rate of success speaks for itself. Much of the Middle East lies in ruins, which was the plan from the get-go. But now comes the hard part, because nothing has really been resolved in Syria. Yes, Bashar Assad is gone, and yes, the Syrian state has disintegrated, but how long will it take before Turkey is fighting the U.S.-backed Kurds in the east, or before Israeli and Turkish interests clash in central or southern Syria, or before HTS proves to be the unreliable terrorist organization it is known to be, and refuses to follow its marching orders from Washington and Tel Aviv, and he might have added also from Turkey. So yes, the invaders may be congratulating themselves this week, quote, for a job well done, unquote, but the Syrian conflagration is not over yet, not by a long shot. There was an important development that took place last week that provides a window into future goings on in the battered country, although the statement was downplayed by most of the media. On Wednesday, officials of Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, HTS, announced that Mohammed al-Bashir had been appointed as Syria's interim prime minister. Al-Bashir, who has been running the Idlib province, has been chosen to lead a small cabinet whose job will be to make sure the government agencies, banks, and public services continue operating without interruption. More importantly, al-Bashir, who speaks English, is the likely designated technocrat chosen by Washington to jumpstart the sale of the country's state-owned assets and businesses, its natural resources, and anything else of value. Judging from past experience, he will probably oversee a sharp reduction in government spending, as well as dramatic cutbacks in education, public safety, and healthcare. He will also seek hefty loans from the IMF for reconstruction that will be diverted to foreign accounts for his family and cronies, leaving ordinary Syrians with an ocean of red ink they can never hope to repay. Sound familiar? Unfortunately, Bashir's debut did not go as well as expected. Here's the story from NBC News. When Syria's new interim prime minister, Mohammed al-Bashir, chaired a cabinet meeting in Damascus on Tuesday, hanging behind him was the flag of the country's suddenly victorious opposition. Next to it, however, was a second banner, popular with the region's Sunni Islamist fighters, featuring the large Arabic letters of the Shahada and Islamic Declaration of Faith. As new Syria fast emerges from the ruins of the Assad regime, the world is watching for hints of what that might look like, and that second flag has concerned those hoping for a future of moderation and tolerance. HTS is banned as a terrorist organization in the United States and elsewhere and grew out of a branch of al-Qaeda. Its leader, Abu Muhammad al-Juwani, said a decade ago there would be no room for religious minorities in the Islamist Syria of which he dreamed about. He also suggested that he could bring terrorism to the West unless it withdrew from the Middle East. Most recently, however, Jolani, who now uses his real name, Ahmad al-Shara, has undergone something of a rebrand, trimming his beard, donning westernized green fatigues, and espousing tolerance for all of Syria's myriad faiths. Nevertheless, plenty of observers are reserving judgment until these words become actions. Seeing Syria's corridors of power welcome a flag, quote, indicating Islamist Salafist leanings, unquote, has, quote, put people on alert, unquote, Sucker said. Although he does not think deploying the emblem was a, quote, wise, unquote, move, he sees it as more reflective of the rebels' origins in Idlib rather than anything else. The classic worry among Western foreign policy watchers was that Assad might be toppled but replaced by something that is not much better, an extremist terror group. Continuing with this long quote from MSNBC, displaying the flag in an image meant to represent Syria's new transition government shows how HTS and Jolani is still, quote, deeply entrenched in their Salafist-Sunni ideology and worldview, unquote. With the group now making more moderate noises and also in a position of considerable influence, the United States is exploring removing HTS terrorist designation. And I have to add, I assume the price on Ahmad Shara's head. That price is $2 million. I think some better come collect it soon, because if they don't, it's going to be taken off his head momentarily. Two current administration officials and a former U.S. official told NBC News, although Washington will watch closely the militant group's moves from its new political vantage point, why a photo of Syria's interim leader could hint at trouble ahead. And that is a photo of Mohammed al-Bashir before and after his Western facelift. Mike Whitney says, the quote is now over, and Mike Whitney says, let's see if I got this right. The Biden administration replaces Assad with a terrorist organization, but is suddenly surprised when it discovers the group is led by terrorists. Is that it? Indeed it is. As you can see, none of this resolves the basic crisis created by the removal of Assad. Instead, the main proponents of regime change, Turkey, the US, and Israel, have merely transformed Syria into an even bigger battleground where their own competing interests will soon play out by way of mortal combat. How long will it take before Turkey locks horns with Israel or the United States? How long before sectarian war engulfs the country? Not long, I'd wager. And for the people who thought that toppling the evil dictator would bring peace and security, they better think again, which, by the way, is a strong opinion Scott Ritter also holds. They better think again. Well, Dee, what did you think of that little piece?
Well, I have to say here, I don't know why people would go back to Syria. They keep talking about this influx of people going back.
Yes, they do. I don't know why people would go back there either, because it ain't over till it's over.
Exactly, and you've got these head chopping terrorists that are in charge now.
Well, they're in charge of at least a segment. They're not in charge of the Kurdish area, and maybe they're not in charge of the south anymore either, as the Israeli troops advance down there.
And they're not kind either.
Oh no, they're not kind at all. They won't chop off your head, but they'll just shoot you on the spot, or maybe take you prisoner and torture you for months in one of their prison camps.
All right, so it's a bad situation all around.
It is a bad situation all around. I make a correction. This story that I quoted from about uh, uh, the debut of Bashir was a story from NBC News, and not from MSNBC, as I stated before. Okay, so that's a correction. But this was written 3 days ago, and considering what's happening now, in other words, considering the attempts at a ceasefire and freeing up of the troops from Gaza so that they're free to march into other areas. Uh, this is beginning to look like a comprehensive effort to get to greater Israel, the greater Israel that is envisioned by the right wing in Israel. And in a recent stream, I brought up the map, okay, of greater Israel. It's Israel stretching from the Nile to the Euphrates. Uh, Not at all what Israel has now. I mean, a multiplication of 10 times at least the area that Israel has now.
Hmm.
So you have to keep in mind that is the long term Israeli project. the Israeli actions that we've seen in recent days are consistent with the long term project.
Exactly. And we talked about it for about a year and a half, and we've been talking about it on my show when the new administration came in, and you heard Ben Gavir and Smotrich talking about it, and then Israel with some of the people would say, "Oh no, don't pay attention to them. They're being extreme." Blah 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 blah. I mean, that and Daniela Weiss, they were letting the cat out of the bag, and others were saying, "No, no, no, not what we're doing." It's like, yes, you are.
Okay, so looking at our comments, uh, we have some highs, and then Lana wishes everybody a Merry Christmas,
Merry
Christmas,
Christmas.
and a happy and healthy New Year. Yes, Merry and Christmas indeed, and to those who don't share Christmas, uh, happy holidays. I hate that phrase, happy holidays, but there it is. Steve Wolfbrand shared this on Facebook. Thank you, Steve. Lana Del says, sick of all this fighting. And worse, because the U.S. is often funding it, or at least stirring things up and making it worse and last longer. Ugh, she says. Jeffrey Denton says 8 decades in Yemen and Palestine.
Mhm.
Wow. And Lisa's here and says, happy holidays to you all. And Jeffrey Denton says, hi, Fitty, uh, which is a nickname for Lisa they used to have in her state of Washington days. Uh, Steve says, thank you, Lisa. Same to you. Lisa says, hi, Jeff, Steve, Lana. Lisa says, you too, Dee and Joe and Bonnie. Thank you, Lisa. And Lisa says, howdy. And Lisa leaves a heart and a kiss. Well, thank you, Lisa. And Neshoba Chomak Shooty says, hey, all. Steve says, hi, Neshoba. Steve says, please share. Jeff Denton says, quote, rebels, unquote, which CEO dies when, quote, rebels take over Iran's government? I can't answer that question, Jeff. Lana says, this is so sad. Jeffries asks, how many weird drones? I don't know. Lisa says, hi, Neshoba. Steve says, please make sure nothing you buy for Christmas is from Israel. Well, fair enough, Steve. Steve says, Jeffrey, things are getting very weird indeed. They are. Steve says, hi, D. Okay, D, you want to move us to the second article? I'll bring that up for you.
Yes, and hello everybody. Just make sure I said hello to everybody. Had my speaker muted for a bit.
Okay. And this article is from Alistair Crook. It's a doozy, as most articles are. Oh, I forgot to share on my Facebook page. I better do that now.
Mhm. Okay, a new geopolitical map is unfolding. The end of Syria and parentheses and of quote Palestine for now. For now is a key word.
Okay, let me go on with this.
Israelis generally are celebrating their victories. Well, this euphoria way with U.S. business elites. Syria has entered the abyss. The demons of Al Qaeda, ISIS, and the most intransigent elements of the Muslim Brotherhood are circling the skies. There is chaos, looting, fear, and a terrible passion for revenge scalds the blood. Street executions are rife. Maybe Hayat Tahrir al-Sham (HTS) and its leader al-Julani, following Turkish instruction, though thought to control things. But HTS is an umbrella label like Al-Qaeda, ISIS, and al-Nusra, and its factions have already descended into factional fighting. The Syrian state dissolved in the middle of the night. The police and army went home, leaving weapon depots open for the Shebab to loot. The prison doors were flung or prized open. Some, no doubt, were political prisoners, but many were not. Some of the most vicious inmates now roam the streets.
Okay, so let me comment here. Okay, first of all, let's remember the date of this article, which was December 16th. So it was just yesterday, current as of yesterday. Now, okay, in talking about the killings, okay, and the lootings here, the chaos, and a terrible passion for revenge, skulls, the blood, street executions are rife, and so on. Uh, we hadn't heard really too much about that. Certainly not here, okay, in the mainstream, but even in the alternative media, some were giving the impression that this was a relatively quiet takeover, by HBS. Okay, but Alistair, who has a lot of personal contact inside of Syria and is very well connected there, is giving you a different picture in these two paragraphs. Okay. And Alistair is most likely to be right because he taps into personal sources. He's very well connected in Syria, very well connected in Lebanon, uh, very well connected in the whole of the Middle East. And based, okay, on previous reports and previous blog posts and interviews he's given, he is a person to be trusted. He's usually right on the mark. Okay, please go ahead, Dee.
I was going to say I had seen some of that violence on Telegram, Telegram channel, but to take that and bring it over to another media, it would be taken down right away.
Yes, yes. It would be taken down right away. Now, this piece probably appeared. The reason why it appeared, let's see, let's go to the bottom for a minute.
Mm.
It was published originally at the Strategic Culture Foundation, which is a Russian source. That
Okay.
explains why, okay, it was allowed to be published. And of course, it's repeated as at uns.com, which is an aggregator, but uh, it's a place where we can pick it up and we can share it without getting banned from Facebook for doing so. Okay, so everybody should be aware of that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so this news, that's as is stated uh, by Alistair here, is something that you will not get from too many other sources.
Right, because the Western media wants to sell a story that's not true.
That's right. Okay, Dee, you can start from the Israelis within days.
Okay, the Israelis, within days, totally eviscerated the defense infrastructure of the state in more than 450 airstrikes, missile air defenses, Syrian Air Force helicopters and aircraft, the Navy and the armories, all destroyed in the quote, largest air operation in Israel's history. Syria no longer exists as a geopolitical entity. In the cast, Kurdish forces, quote, parentheses, with U.S. military support, are seizing the oil and agriculture resources of the former state. Erdogan's forces and proxies are engaged in an attempt to crush the Kurdish enclave completely. Although the U.S. has now mediated a ceasefire of sorts, and in the southwest, Israeli tanks have seized the Golan and land beyond to within 20 kilometers of Damascus. In 2015, The Economist magazine wrote, quote, "Black gold under the Golan. Geologists in Israel think they have found oil in very tricky territory. Israeli and American oilmen believe they have discovered a bonanza in this most inconvenient of sites."
Oh, that's amazing.
I know.
Yeah, that's amazing. And of course, gives a tremendous motivation for Israel to forget about what they're doing in Gaza and to go try to grab that whole area before anybody else does
Hmm.
and keep it for good, right?
Oh, exactly.
Yeah.
And a big impediment, Syria. To the West's energy ambitions just dissipated. The strategic political balancer to Israel that was Syria since 1948 has vanished, and the earlier easing of tensions between the Sunni sphere and Iran has been disrupted by the rude intervention of ISIS rebrands and by Ottoman revanchism working with Israel via American and British intermediaries. The Turks have never really reconciled themselves to the 1923 treaty that concluded World War I, by which they ceded what is now northern Syria to the new state of Syria. Within days, Syria has been dismembered, partitioned, and balkanized. So why do Israel and Turkey still bomb? The bombing started the moment Bashir al Assad departed, because Turkey and Israel worry that today's conquerors may prove uh, ephemeral and,
Yes. That's right. Okay. Ephemeral.
and may soon themselves be displaced. You don't need to own a thing in order to control it. As the powerful states in the region, Israel and Turkey will wish to exercise control not just over resources, but over the vital regional crossroads and passageway that was Syria.
Right. So, in other words, this is a naked imperialist attack.
Right.
That's what we're seeing here.
And from what I understand, this was already brought up to the UN, but we'll see what the UN will do.
Yes, it was brought up to the UN by HTS, I believe,
Yes.
because they're claiming to, to be the legitimate rulers of Syria now. So they're representing the state of Syria at the UN.
Inevitably, however, quote, Greater Israel is likely at some point to butt heads with Erdogan's Ottomanesque revanchism. Equally, the Saudi, Egyptian, UAE front will not welcome the resurgence of either ISIS rebrands nor the Turkish-inspired and Ottomanized Muslim Brotherhood. The latter poses an immediate threat to Jordan, now bordering the new revolutionary entity.
Okay, so does that explain the news of a coup we heard in Jordan?
Could explain it, yeah.
Okay, please go on.
Such concerns may push the Gulf states closer to Iran. Qatar, as a purveyor of arms and funding to the HTS cartel, may again be ostracized by other Gulf leaders.
Oh, this is so interesting. So there's a big game of balance of power politics going on
Hmm.
within West Asia,
Yes.
and it involves conflicts of Turkey with the rest of the Arab lands, or many, okay, of the other Arab lands. And in turn, the leaders of those Arab lands are being pushed closer to Iran. So perhaps one consequence, okay, of the uprising we see in Syria may actually be the Gulf states coming even closer to Iran than they are now.
Yeah,
So that could make Iran stronger when everybody was thinking that the coup was going to make Iran weaker.
right.
That's
They were
interesting.
selling it. They kept selling it.
Yeah, they kept selling that, but of course, it may not be true.
Yeah.
All kinds of unintended consequences always come up.
Such concerns may push these Gulf states closer to Iran. Oh, did I say that already?
Yeah, but you can go ahead and repeat it.
Okay, Qatar as purveyor of arms and funding to the ISIS cartel may again be ostracized by other Gulf states, Gulf leaders. The new geopolitical map poses many direct questions about Iran, Russia, China, and the BRICS. Russia has played a complex hand in the Middle East. On the one hand, prosecuting an escalating defensive war versus NATO powers and managing key energy interests, while at the same time trying to moderate resistance operations towards Israel in order to keep relations with the U.S. from deteriorating utterly.
Oh, that's a very interesting comment
Uh huh.
because I don't know how much worse the relations with the U.S. could get than they are now,
Exactly.
other than a nuclear war.
Right. Moscow hopes, without great conviction, that a dialogue with the incoming U.S. president might emerge at some point in the future.
Oh, there's Donald Trump coming in again.
Yep. Moscow likely will draw the conclusion that ceasefire deals such as the Astana Agreement on jihadist containment within the boundaries of the Idlib Autonomous Zone in Syria are not worth the paper on which they were written. Turkey, an Astana guarantor, stabbed Moscow in the back. Likely, it will make the Russian leadership more hard nosed over Ukraine and of any Western talk of ceasefire.
I think that's a very interesting thought. Okay, and it's also kind of like an A2 Brute thing
Yeah.
because, uh, of course, uh, 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 the Russians have been working with Turkey on many fronts, and supposedly there's been a personal relationship between uh, uh, Putin, and Erdogan. And Putin clearly stabbed him in the back in the context of Syria.
Uh,
I should say Erdogan,
Erdogan did, yeah.
Putin
Yeah.
in the back.
Um, and that's something that Erdogan does all the time. He does it to anyone because, I mean, he looks at his own interests first. And he has that supremacy complex too, where he is concerned.
And he has a supremacy complex, but I think that Putin thought that Erdogan would have the good sense, but not to double cross him, because as powerful as Turkey is, Russia is so much more dangerous,
Oh, yeah.
so much more powerful. But I guess he didn't have the good sense.
No. Iran's supreme leader spoke on 11 December. Quote, there should be no doubt that what happened in Syria was plotted in the command rooms of the United States and Israel. We have evidence for this. One of the neighboring countries of Syria also played a role. But the
I,
primary
who's
planners
talking
are
about
the
Turkey here?
U.S. and the Zionist regime. Exactly.
Yeah.
In this context, Ayatollah Khamenei quashed speculations about any weakening of the will to resist.
Yeah.
Turkey's proxy victory in Syria, nonetheless, may prove uh, Pyrrhic.
May prove Pyrrhic.
Pyrrhic, okay. Um, Erdogan's foreign minister Hakan Fidan lied to Russia, the Gulf states, and Iran about the nature of what was being cooked up in Syria. But the mess now is Erdogan's. Those that he double crossed will, at some point, extract payback.
I think Putin is going to extract payback
Oh, I think so
for
too.
sure.
Iran seemingly will revert to its earliest stance of gathering together the desperate threads of regional resistance to fight the Al Qaeda's reincarnation. It will not turn its back on China, nor the BRICS project. Iraq, recalling the ISIS atrocities of its civil war, will join with Iran, as will Yemen. Iran will be aware that the remaining nodes of the former Syrian army might, well, at some point enter into the fight against the ATS cartel. Mayor al Assad took his entire armored division with him into exile in Iraq on the night of Bashar Assad's departure.
Okay, so this is the first place I've seen that.
Yes.
Okay, I didn't realize that, there was a whole armored division that went into exile in Iraq. And of course, they were not bombed by the Israelis.
China will not be pleased at events in Syria. The Uyghurs played a prominent part in the Syria uprising. There was an estimated 30,000 Uyghurs in Idlib under training by Turkey, which sees Uyghurs as the original component of the Turkic nation. China, too, will likely see the overthrow of Syria as underlying punitive Western threats to their own energy security lines that run through Iran, Saudi Arabia, and Iraq. Finally, Western interests have been fighting over Middle Eastern resources for centuries, and ultimately that is what lies behind the war today. Is he or isn't he pro war? People asked about Trump, since he was already signaled that energy dominance will be a key strategy for his administration. Well, Western countries are deep in debt. Their fiscal room for maneuver is shrinking fast, and bondholders are beginning to mutiny. There is a race to find a new collateral for fiat currencies. It used to be gold. Since the 1970s, it was oil, but the petrodollar has faltered. The Anglo Americans would love to have Iran's oil again, as they did until the 1970s, to collateralize and build a new money system tied to the real value inherent in commodities.
Okay, I have to make a comment about that particular paragraph. Okay, this, of course, does not recognize the MMT perspective, okay, on how governments that are monetary sovereign actually finance themselves. Okay, they are fiat currencies. The assumption here in this paragraph is that you have to have something that backs, your fiat currency. But the truth is, you don't need to have anything backing, a fiat currency, except for the backing of your people. The question is whether the currency, okay, is a legitimate currency or not, and what drives the legitimacy of the currency are such things as the government taxing in that particular currency, and the general use of the currency in domestic trade. So for nations like Australia, Canada, the United States, the UK, their fiat currency, Japan, their fiat currencies are very well established, and they're not backed by gold, and they're not backed by oil, they're not backed by the petrodollar. Okay, and they're not backed by anything except by the acceptance of the currency by the people who live in those particular states. So the point is the fact that the currencies that the Western countries are deeply in debt, okay, in terms of their bond issuance, doesn't mean a thing because they can pay off the bonds as they fall due. There is no problem with the debt, even though the debts are enormous. Okay, there is no problem. In the case of the United States, of course, uh, there's a power to use platinum coins to establish a fund to pay off all the debt. Okay, there can also be overt congressional financing that always provides for the repayment of debt in any fiscal year, simply by fiat, okay, of Congress. These methods are not used here in the United States at this point, but they can always be used. They're in the background. If there's any faltering of confidence, okay, or faltering of the currency in any way, of course, the government will turn to whatever tools it needs in order to reinforce and strengthen, okay, the currency. And at least in the United States, it is constitutionally prohibited from failing to pay the debt, no matter how large, okay, the debt is. So eventually, the U.S. will have to turn uh, uh, to its power to create the currency or to coin, okay, the money, uh, in order to ensure that it always pays, okay, its debts. So I did want to point that out. I did want to say, okay, in general, the foreign policy experts that we rely on each day for sensible views on the politics of foreign countries, the dynamics of international politics, the military facts involved, the facts about the balance of power in all these nations. There's not a single one of these experts that I've seen on YouTube or seen writing who understands the MMT approach to economics. So none of them understand the relationship of the government but to its debt and the capacities of Western governments that are monetary sovereigns to pay off their debts. And so whenever they write about the problems of debt, okay, in Western countries, these experts in foreign policy don't have any intellectual authority for their statements. And that includes the former ambassador, Alistair Crook. So I wanted to emphasize that. I love Alistair's analyses and his writing. But when he starts to talk about fiscal sustainability and fiscal room, for maneuver, or when Colonel McGregor talks about this, or when Jeffrey Sachs talks about this, they just don't know what they're talking about. So I did want to make that point very clearly and upfront.
Well, that was very important to do so.
Okay, so please go ahead, Dee.
Okay, but Trump says he wants to, quote, end wars and not start them. Does the redrawing of the geopolitical map make some global entente between East and West more or less likely? For all the talk of possible Trump deals with Iran and Russia, it is likely too early to say whether they will or can materialize. Seemingly, Trump has to secure the domestic deal first, before he will know whether he has the scope for foreign policy deals. It seems that the ruling structures, uh, notably the never Trump element in the Senate, will allow Trump considerable latitude on key nominations for domestic departments and agencies that manage U.S. political and economic affairs, which is Trump's key concern, and will also permit a certain discretion on, shall we say, the warfare departments that targeted Trump over the last years, such as the FBI and the Department of Justice. The putative deal seems to be that his nominations will still need to undergo Senate confirmation and must broadly be on side with interagency foreign policy, notably on Israel.
Okay, the interagency, of course, is this construct by foreign policy analysts that involves agencies like the CIA and the NSA, but also involves the interagency involves uh, 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 various leaders of Congress, various leaders, okay, of the media, and I think it today also includes some of the richest people in the world, the oligarchs, who run quite a lot of America. We also often refer to the interagency as the establishment. I think the two terms, okay, are interchangeable. Okay, but anyway, I want to clarify what he meant by the interagency. Please go on, Dee.
The interagency grandees, however, reportedly assist on their veto over nominations affecting the deepest structures of foreign policy, and therein lies the crux of matters. Israelis generally are celebrating their victories. With this euphoria way with U.S. business elites. Hezbollah is contained, Syria is demilitarized, and Iran is not on Israel's border. The threat to Israel today is of a qualitatively lower order. Is this in itself sufficient to allow tensions to ease, or to see some wider understanding to emerge? Much will hang on Netanyahu's own political circumstances. Should the Prime Minister emerge from his criminal court process relatively unscathed, would he need to take the big bet of military action against Iran, with the geopolitical map so suddenly transformed?
Yes, it's very interesting. Would he want to take the big bet, against Iran when he has a chance to exploit the resources of Syria without actually taking that bet? I think that's an interesting question.
Oh, it is.
I do want to take this opportunity, though, to say something else. Okay, specifically, uh, there's been kind of a transformation uh, in commentary on Western Asia as a result of the fall, okay, of Syria. Uh, the same experts who were saying that Israel, okay, was on the point of collapse, okay, that the momentum was all on the side of the axis of resistance. Further, that specifically Hezbollah had a great deal of military capability to inundate Israel with rockets and missiles and drones, with a huge stock of 150,000. I'm sure Hezbollah has so far used only about 4,000 or 5,000 of the 150,000 objects that they were supposedly capable of throwing, at Israel. The same experts also thought that Iran's military capability in relation to missiles and rockets and drones was perhaps 10 times as great as Hezbollah's. And of course, they also had access or have access to hypersonic missiles. And uh, supposedly the Iranians have an air defense system that is now very strong because it's been recently strengthened by S-400s, from Russia. Uh, the same people who were making the claims that Iran was capable of retaliating against Israel to the tune of single attacks, numbering something like ballistic missiles in a quantity of 2,000, with those attacks led by hypersonic missiles. Those same analysts are suddenly saying that because of the fall of Syria, the balance of power has tremendously shifted in Western Asia, but towards Israel. That Israel specifically is saved, and that they're on the move, and they now are implying that Israel is likely to succeed in its quest, for greater Israel. They see the axis of resistance is on its knees because of the fall of Israel, and they somehow have come to the conclusion, at least you don't hear very much from them, about the possibility of a retaliation for the October 26 bombings by Iran. And of course, that's because Iran hasn't been talking about it, lately. I respect the commentators who are stating this kind of view. They've been very perspicacious about all kinds of things, including the facts on the ground and the balance of power in the Ukraine war. But from my perspective, the basic facts of the power of Iran and Hezbollah to devastate Israel, and in particular, their collective power to devastate the air bases, of Israel, and their power to attack the settlers, in Israel. The basic facts of power in relation to these matters have not changed because of the victory, in Syria. All the victory in Syria has done to the capability of Hezbollah and the Houthis and the Iraqi resistance, and Iran. All that's happened there is basically that the pathway from Iran to Lebanon to ship arms to Hezbollah, is now perhaps greatly weakened, or maybe non-existent. But this cutting of that particular tie doesn't erase the present capability of these two forces to devastate Israel, and particularly its air capability by destroying the air bases, and of course its capability to devastate the settler components of the West Bank, of Israel. As the capability of these two forces, helped by the Houthis and the Iraqi resistance, is still there and is not affected by what went on, in Syria. So, to summarize this, I don't see why friends that we agree with on much uh, uh, should be basically. Uh, I don't see why they're so down on the capabilities of Iran and Hezbollah now. I don't see why they're so convinced that those forces have sustained a serious defeat, or why they think that suddenly Israel, which they all agreed was on the point of collapse, not, let's say, 2 weeks ago, that suddenly Israel is not on the point of collapse now. From my point of view, its economy is still in ruins. It sustained very heavy losses when it comes to the battlefield. It has an opponent inside of Iran, which is about to become a nuclear power. Okay, and its lines are now stretched because it's thrown troops in Syria, along a long line. It's seeking a ceasefire in Gaza, probably because it wants to free up troops to send into Syria. It's true in Syria itself, there's no opposition, but uh, okay, I think that Israel itself is not defended by Israeli troops who are attacking, okay, in Syria. So to me, there seems to be a great opening from the resistance forces to devastate Israel in the coming days if they take the opportunity. And I don't know why our favorite commentators suddenly seem so insistent on emphasizing the victory of Israel and the United States over the Axis, okay, of resistance. So I did want to add this commentary to the picture that Alistair Crook is painting. I also have to note that he specifically did not talk about the. He didn't really talk about the issue of whether Israel was no longer on the verge of collapse. He was not addressing that particular issue. But other commentators on what's going on in Syria have emphasized that. It may be that Alistair is too wise to draw such a conclusion. Anyway, so that's my final commentary on that article. Dee, have you got anything to add?
As we said, things are unfolding every day. And I just thought of something when you were talking about with the weapons, losing Syria to transport weapons. When you look at the overthrow of Jordan, if there was a coup, Jordan would be an avenue if if a group overthrows and is with the resistance to use Jordan as a pathway.
It might be. It depends upon who executed the coup.
Exactly, that's what I was thinking along those lines. If
Okay, if there are groups in there that executed the coup, but that are strongly supportive of the Palestinians, if the group represents the Palestinians inside of Jordan,
and most do inside of Jordan.
yes, most do, okay, inside of Jordan, but if the coup actually arose out of the Palestinians in Jordan, those Palestinians are going to be very supportive of the Israeli Palestinians. And therefore, they might well open up a path for the Iranians to resupply Hezbollah.
Yes.
That could easily happen. That's, I think, very interesting comment. So it remains to be seen what's going on in Jordan. But I think the lesson is that the situation inside of the Middle East right now is very, very fluid. As Steve Wolfbrand said, Jeffrey, things are getting very weird indeed. And he also says, hi, D. Steve says, I'm rather optimistic about Trump. he invited the Chinese leader to uh, um, 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 his inauguration, which he did do. And Steve says, "Can you imagine if he accepted and showed up?" I can imagine that, but I can also imagine him communicating with Trump and asking whether it was okay for Xi to bring his close pal, specifically Putin, to the inauguration as well. I think that would be a very interesting development.
From what I understand, the Chinese ambassador, is going to be attending.
Ah, okay. So she did not accept the invitation.
But the ambassador, they're having the ambassador go.
Right. I suppose that's a wise response.
Yes. And then what I was just going to say something else. Yeah, the other night we talked about on the show, on one of the shows, um, where Russia was talking about a base in Libya.
Yes. Its base in Libya is still there. The HTS is not trying to expel them at this point. In fact, they seem to be being fairly friendly to the Russians. Okay, now whether the Russians will stay at either the naval base or the air base or both uh, isn't really clear now. The Russians are maneuvering. They're making gestures as if they're going to move to Libya. Uh, uh, they're kind of moving things around, from location to location inside of that area, okay, of Syria. At this point, we don't really know what they're going to do. Okay, so I think that's interesting. Okay, but D, is that what you had in mind?
Yeah, I just found the whole thing interesting.
Yes,
Everybody's maneuvering.
yes, everybody's maneuvering. I don't think we've seen the last of Syria yet.
No, I don't think so either.
I mean, God knows, what the Iranians might do still. But we will see. We will certainly see. Okay, so I wanted to go to a third of our topics tonight, which is Trump and the trade deficits. And the reason why I picked this up is because one of the world's finest economists, specifically Yanis Varoufakis, the former finance minister of Greece, wrote this article. And I thought it was very well written and had very interesting views. And I will read that. I should add, Giannis is not, an MMT economist, but he was a colleague of the MMTers at the Levy Institute here in the United States. He's also close to Jamie Galbraith, who understands MMT very, very well. And I'm sure he's read quite a bit, of MMT. And I think that his personal relations with Stephanie Kelton are very good as well. So, the title of this article is America's Trade Deficit is Not Afraid of Donald Trump. This was originally published at Project Syndicate. I picked it up at Portside, which reprinted it. It's dated December 15th, 2024. The author is Yanis Varoufakis. And the tagline is, if the U.S. president-elect's efforts to eliminate America's trade deficit succeed, real estate prices in Miami and Manhattan will crash. The cost of servicing government debt will skyrocket, and the Dow Jones will plummet. Now, here I already have to add, I saw a video a few days ago where the host was interviewing someone who collects all kinds of current data on what's happening to real estate prices around the United States. And the expert who studies and analyzes the data uh, was saying that real estate prices in parts of the United States are starting to crash because of the big investors like the Blackstones of the world and other large companies that were buying up houses in the aftermath of the crash of 2009, and then were uh, you know, uh, holding on to these houses, maybe selling them at a much higher price or renting them out. Um, 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 in the meantime, that uh, that these companies bought these houses at a very high price, and that their margins in renting the houses out were often not uh, uh, sufficient to guard against the risks of vacancies from time to time, and the risks that's introduced by the price of home insurance and especially property tax, in various areas of the United States. So what's been happening is that in their individual investments, okay, in the housing area, uh, uh, these large companies have been losing money in many markets. So a lot of them these days want to recapture capital they've spent. How do you do that? You do that by selling properties. Now, when they sell the properties, they want to try and keep quiet about it, okay, and not be clear that they're trying to sell. But so many of them are trying to sell that more and more houses are selling at very low prices in many areas of Florida, for example. Evidently, the crisis has already come to Florida. So the selling prices of these houses are going down, and selling prices are public. So people doing the research can see the prices are falling, and they're falling by very large amounts because these companies that had invested, okay, in the real estate and paid the high prices uh, were now trying to turn over the houses and get rid of the housing. And they're selling sometimes at discounts of 30% to 35% of what the supposed market value of these houses were. So when they sell at those kinds of discounts, when you get down to the particular neighborhoods where this process, okay, is going on, suddenly these large companies, because so many of them involved, and so many of them are looking to sell now, they're destroying the real estate market in many areas of Florida right now. And the real estate prices are already starting to crash. And this has nothing to do with Trump's policies, of course, because he's not the president yet. Okay, but what I'm trying to say is that there's already a real estate price crash starting in many areas of the United States, particularly in Florida. There's data to show this and to back this up. And so, if Giannis is right, that if the trade deficit succeeds, real estate prices are likely to crash. This might not be so hard to imagine since the crash is already starting without Trump even coming into office. So that's the point I wanted to make here. But now getting to the article. Okay, so Giannis is in Athens, so it's, dated Athens, obviously. Donald Trump is as sincere as he is capable of being in his determination to eliminate the U.S. trade deficit. But the U.S. trade deficit is even more determined to remain enormous and will likely swat aside whatever the 47th President of the United States throws at it, because it is hardwired into the structure of post-Bretton Woods America. The deficit lies beyond the means and the ends of the incoming administration. So, in other words, a prominent economist who's known the world over is saying that Trump is not going to be able to reduce, the deficit, and he's saying more, as we shall see. Start with the means. Trump has two hefty instruments at his disposal in the battle with the trade balance: standard import tariffs and Section 232 of the 1962 Trade Expansion Act, whereby the U.S. government can appeal to national security to justify retaliatory action against protectionist countries or blocs. The EU, for example, imposes a flat special 10% tariff on all car imports, plus other administrative restrictions, while maintaining a gigantic surplus in the US-EU car trade. Giannis goes on, but neither tariffs nor Section 232 actions can reliably shrink America's trade deficits. To see why, suppose that Trump, who says that he will impose 25% tariffs on Canada, China, and Mexico on his first day in office, does use tariffs and other punitive import restricting measures enthusiastically. Sure enough, imports will shrink, but so will U.S. exports, especially when his tariffs and quotas are combined with the large tax cuts promised to Elon Musk and his merry band of big tech oligarchs. The adverse impact of tariffs on U.S. exports reflects the international role of the dollar, the only currency non-Americans want to hold, even if they do not wish to buy anything from any U.S. company. If Trump raises tariffs to the levels he thinks are necessary to stem Chinese and European imports and bolster his government's revenues, allowing him to reduce domestic taxes, money markets are bound to push the dollar much higher. And indeed, much, much higher if domestic tax cuts are also introduced, which of course is what Trump wants to do. So even if Trump's tariffs tend to reduce imports, the rising dollar will counteract his tendency by boosting imports and curtailing U.S. exports. The U.S. trade deficit will remain more or less intact. That brings us to the ends of Trump's administration. For the sake of argument, consider the improbable scenario in which his methods succeed in eliminating or at least substantially shrinking America's trade deficit. In that case, he would find himself confronting a personal and political Waterloo. While working class voters delivered his recent victory, the people Trump considers, quote, his, unquote, are financiers and real estate developers. Keeping them happy is his calling. And there's the rub. Eliminating the U.S. trade deficit would destroy their fortunes. A brief trip down memory lane shows why. After World War II, the U.S. maintained a trade surplus by dollarizing Europe and Japan, thus allowing its allies to buy the U.S. exports. The dollarization of Europe and Japan was implemented through aid such as the Marshall Plan, loans, and crucially, the fixed exchange rates under the Bretton Woods system between the dollar, European currencies, the yen, and gold. This system worked splendidly so long as the U.S. ran a trade surplus. But with every aircraft, domestic appliance, and IBM computer Europe and Japan bought from the U.S., dollars that America had sent abroad were repatriated, thus closing the U.S. surplus recycling loop, rendering it sustainable. By 1971, however, the U.S. trade balance had turned negative. As a net importer, the U.S. economy was exporting more and more dollars to Europe and Japan. At the same time, much of the Pentagon's enormous expenditure on the Vietnam War leaked rivers of dollars to Southeast Asia, Japan, and even Europe. In short, a torrent of dollars was accumulating in the vaults of central banks in foreign countries. The Bretton Woods system was predicated on America's pledge to deliver an ounce of U.S.-owned gold to anyone willing to pay $35 for it. In view of the flood of dollars into the hands of non-Americans, doubts about whether the U.S. would honor this pledge began to grow. Like a self-fulfilling prophecy, on August 15, 1971, President Richard Nixon withdrew that pledge and effectively blew up the post-war system of fixed exchange rates, pushing the dollar sharply lower and the German and Japanese currencies sharply higher. Soon, Europe's and Japan's central banks were in a bind, unable to swap their accumulated dollars for U.S. gold. They were also reluctant to swap them for Deutsche Marks or yen, lest their exchange rate rise further and deal additional blows to German and Japanese exporters. So they used their stashed dollars as a substitute for gold reserves and channeled them to Wall Street through financial intermediaries to buy U.S. debt, real estate, and whatever equities the U.S. authorities allowed foreigners to purchase. And this is how we arrived at the delicious quasi-paradox that is the nature of America's global hegemony today. The U.S. trade deficit provides European and Asian capitalists with demand for their net exports to America and sustains the capital inflows that finance the U.S. government and boost the U.S. financiers and developers, Trump's mates, his mates. If Trump's efforts to eliminate the U.S. trade deficit succeed, real estate prices in Miami and along New York's Fifth Avenue will come crashing down. Why? Because these foreign governments will no longer be investing in these equities. The cost of servicing the government's debt will skyrocket. Well, only skyrocket if the Federal Reserve should raise the cost of debt. So the Treasury Department has to raise the interest rates on its debt instruments. And the Dow Jones will plummet. Perhaps Trump needs to be reminded that the most vengeful of deities is one that grants him his sincerest wish. Yanis Varoufakis is very clever, but he's pointing to a very well-known dynamic that was written about by Michael Hudson in his book on super imperialism, which has gone through many printings and revisions over the years. It was published during the 1970s, and it's still coming out in new editions and revisions, today. And that's because it was the first book to elucidate this cycle of dollars that Giannis is pointing to here. Specifically, what Trump's attempts to raise tariffs would do is to disrupt this particular cycle of dollars and the investments by foreigners in equities here in the U.S. And that would mean that prices of these equities, because demand for these equities would be reducing, of course, the prices of these equities would be going down. And that means since the rich are invested big dollars in these equities, they would be losing money. Their investments, in other words, would be unsustainable. And of course, many of those people are the biggest backers of Donald Trump. And once they saw their investments going down the drain, they would put they would turn their influence onto the Trump administration, forcing it to change its policies and leave off the high tariffs, because the high tariffs can be ruinous, of course, but for the administration. But there was one point that Giannis makes here, if I can find it again. Let's see where I can find it. And this is how we arrived at the delicious quasi-paradox that is the nature of Americans' global hegemony today. The U.S. trade deficit provides European and Asian capitalists with demand for their net exports to America, and sustains the capital inflows that finance the U.S. government and boost U.S. Financiers and also developers, the mates of Donald Trump. That is a critical sentence, but also we have to note that it's not really their capital inflows that finance the U.S. government, or anyway that have to finance the U.S. government, because the U.S. government could always turn to self-financing its activities by creating money. And by the way, Giannis knows this very, very well because of his exposure to MMT, but he neglects to put it up in this article. So one thing Trump could do is, when he sees the dollar cycle being disrupted, he would be able to create money and extend credit in dollars, continue to extend credit, in spite of the fact that the capital inflows were not coming from the European and Asian capitalists anymore. So there's a way for the federal government to compensate for that. It might hurt uh, uh, the investments of his buddies. I think that key point is a valid point that Giannis makes, but it would not necessarily crash the economy as a whole here, because with a deficit that, okay, is large enough and that is financed in the proper way, the U.S. government, uh, can stop any depression or recession. But of course, the Trump administration would have to respond, okay, in a way that is very foreign to Republican thinking. And by the way, to thinking of most of the Democrats also, specifically if a crash were to develop of the government would have to respond by creating all the deficit dollars without issuing any debt, and would have to place those dollars in the hands of those who would spend them, not in the hands of the oligarchs who simply sock them away or use them to raise property values here in the United States. So, Dee, any comments on that piece?
Let me think. It's quite interesting, and the world of Trump, and just the way when we talk about, the when it comes to the trade and just the world as a whole, and what he wants to try to accomplish. I mean, even him with the 100% tariffs, claiming that with Canada, and Canada's said that they would stop importing or their exports to the U.S., which would leave New York, Michigan, and some other states without any, you know, energy, fuel, whatever they, coming in from Canada. So Canada's going to the complete other extreme with the whole negotiation thing with Trump. So it's going to be quite interesting with
I
Trump.
think what Canada is doing is responding in the traditional way, uh, which is if Trump wants to raise tariffs, then they're responding with a trade war. But they're viewing Trump as starting a trade war, and they're going to respond in kind.
Exactly. So it's like, well, New York, Michigan, this is what somebody was discussing about that. You know, um, there's going to be citizens
Who are going to
suff
be, yeah, going to be
freezing.
cold, who are going to be freezing, and they're not going to like that. And they're not going to like Trump's policies. They're going to scream bloody murder.
Right, and especially Michigan that gave him the win.
Did Michigan give him the win?
Well, there was Michigan was a state that was they were both trying to get.
Yes, I know.
It
Okay,
was
but he still would have won, though. Even without Michigan.
that's true, but they're saying Michigan is did
Yeah, Michigan was one of those states, but it's pretty clear that he lost Michigan because of uh, 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 um, his because of Biden's policies towards Israel.
right. Biden's policies towards Israel was the issue, and then he had his Tiffany's father-in-law out there with the Arab community. Um,
Yes,
you know,
he did.
he's Lebanese American background.
Yeah, right. And so people believed him that he would do something to stop the stuff that was going on, okay, in Gaza. Well, he may be very lucky when it comes to that particular thing, because it could be the Israelis' plan, at least temporarily, to stop the slaughter in Gaza themselves so they can put troops into Syria.
That's interesting. And what's interesting too is that um, Tiffany's father-in-law, his father always supported the resistance movements, and so does Tiffany's father-in-law support. They've given money to Hezbollah and different groups.
Yeah, that's very interesting.
It
And
is.
so Trump has him appointed him as ambassador to Lebanon, or will
He will.
appoint him as the ambassador to Lebanon.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, very interesting things are going on with respect to Trump. The pattern of the Trump administration is not established. There are many appointments that are hopeless, but there are also many appointments that may be rejected by the Congress. Steve says that he's not um, um, uh, MAGA, but I am liking Trump the more I hear about him. Uh,
I mean, some of his picks I'm okay with. Others I'm like, oh my, oh for heaven's sakes, you know what I'm saying? It's just one way or the other.
yeah, okay, Trump is Trump. Okay, I'll give him this. He is willing to negotiate, with Russia. There was no indication at all from Harris or from the Biden administration that they were willing to negotiate. And certainly since the election is over, all they've been doing is escalating uh, in Ukraine, and stupidly escalating, because the Russians are counter escalating also. And the armies of Ukraine are on the point of collapse. Everybody agrees about that. It's only a matter of time, but I mean, it could happen before Christmas. It's that close. Okay. Uh, and it also depends upon how Russia is going to retaliate. Just today, there was a report that the Ukrainian Secret Service, I guess they're called the FSB, I think they have the initials as the Russian uh, 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 intelligence service, but uh, they had a successful assassination of a general, General Kirillov, a very high-ranking general. Their assassination is classified as a terrorist attack and legitimately classified as that. And now the Ukrainians are waiting for retaliation uh, by Putin. Putin has recently been talking about using Oreshniks to retaliate for certain things. I can easily see Putin now responding by directing an Oreshnik attack on FSB headquarters, okay, in Ukraine, and wiping the whole thing in the surrounding areas, completely obliterating the whole thing, with an Oreshnik missile.
And also, there's news about the general too. It's because I was just going to pull up something. So I was just about to say what you were saying.
Okay,
Uh,
go and pull it up then.
no, it has the general that he was head of Russia's chemical and biological defense forces.
Yes, he was.
Previously accused the Biden administration and George Soros of funding biolabs in Ukraine.
Yes, I know.
So
He
that
was.
was
And that is very good to bring that out
yes,
as
he was
well.
just
Okay, so he was a very important figure. He was a popular general, evidently doing a great job, and he was assassinated. And the point is that in the rules of war, you don't assassinate high level officials from the other side. You don't assassinate him. It's a violation, okay, of international law. But it is terrorism, and Putin is free to retaliate in whatever terrible way he wants to retaliate. In other words, but he's not going to produce a terror act of his own. What he's going to do is to attack military targets, and very severely and very seriously. And he will exact a price 1,000 times over uh, for this killing of the general. He has to do it because, as Scott Ritter has pointed out, If he doesn't retaliate very, very strongly, then the FSB will continue with more attacks on high level Russian officials and may, in fact, even try to take out Putin himself. So Putin really has to respond very, very strongly to this. That he has to indicate that Russia is not going to retaliate, is not going to tolerate this kind of attack on its high-level officials. So I think that's going to happen. I did want to say, I don't know if Steve is still here. He said good night at 10:54, but he's still here. I did want to say that in addition to Trump's being open to negotiating with Russia, he seems to be open to a negotiation with Iran as well. Now, I don't know if he will be talking terms, which the Iranians care to entertain. Scott thinks that they will even adhere to very harsh terms because they don't want to have a war with the United States, okay, at this point. And I don't know, Scott might be right about that, but on the other hand, for the Iranians to attack Israel right now when they're busy in Syria and to uh, hit them with a very large missile attack on their air bases and the settler areas and try to create total chaos in Israel. Okay, between the Iranians, okay, and Hezbollah, they probably could hit Israel with something like, well, I don't know, certainly 2,250 missiles, something like that. The kind of chaos that would be creating, okay, in Israel, uh, would probably demoralize, the Israelis, have them on their knees, while they're attacking, okay, in Syria. A lot of the home fronts would be destroyed, and their air capability would also be destroyed. At that point, if Trump comes into office and he wants to negotiate, with the Iranians, I think the terms of the negotiation would be entirely different. Of course, the Israelis would be furious at that, but what could they do in response to such an attack, except, of course, to sue for peace? Their air power would be gone. They could not use it in Syria. They could not use it, in Lebanon. And by the way, the Iranians have enough missiles that as the Israelis tried to repair the air bases, they could knock out those air bases again. By the way, the attacks wouldn't only be on the air bases, they would be on the Israeli defense systems also. And it's been indicated even before the ceasefire, okay, in Lebanon, uh, Hezbollah was able to overwhelm the Iron Dome and hit Israel with missiles. The Iron Dome has been failing again and again, failing against the Houthis as well. It would not be hard for Iran to overwhelm the Iron Dome, okay, in this attack, and not just to overwhelm it, but to knock out the batteries of the Iron Dome itself. So Israel would be stripped of its air forces and stripped of its air defense. It would have to call for peace, and it would have to settle for a Palestinian state, and it would have to call for this before Trump even took office if the Iranians were to hit them now. So anyway, that's my opinion. Any further commentary on that, D?
I I don't know what else to say. Everything's just happening we don't know. Things are changing, but Iran's response, I just really feel so strongly, is crucial.
Yes, I think it's crucial too. I think Iran has recently been coming up with statements again about its willingness to keep the axis of resistance going, and its capability and its willingness uh, to attack, okay, in response. So they may be getting ready for attack actually right now,
Hmm.
and we'll just have to see.
That's it. Just have to see.
We just have to see. Okay, if you don't have anything else, it looks like we don't have any more comments. The last was Steve's at 10:54 p.m. He said good night. Uh, we're at 27 people, so attendance was down. Okay, at this point. Oh, by the way, I did want to say one more thing. Uh, Giannis's account of trade and the dynamics of trade and how bans on imports and stuff like that can be very stabilizing was very, very interesting. But I also have to add to that the idea that us having big trade deficits doesn't really destabilize the economy here if the government is willing to invest here to build up industries of various kinds. In other words, when trade deficits are very big, then the job of the government is to balance them off with very large fiscal deficits or budget deficits in key areas. So the money that is leaked to trade comes back from the government. Now, I explored this dynamic in my book, uh, 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 Who Needs Balanced Trade? Who Needs Balanced Budget? Okay, the book is at Amazon. Okay, it's a Kindle book. I'm going to take this opportunity to give the link to the book. Uh, if you'll be patient for another moment, I will bring it up. Here it is. Who needs balanced trade? Who needs balanced budgets? It doesn't have too many reviews, so its ratings are not very high. But there's the cover of it, and
Now you got to put it up in the room.
oh, thank you. I will put it up in the room. And there it is. It's $9.99. It's only in a Kindle edition at this point. I published it in uh, 2015. I can't believe this is 9 years old already.
How
So,
time flies.
yeah, just to go through this a little bit, the United States has trade deficits for nearly 40 years now. Many are convinced this is the primary factor explaining the migration of American jobs quote unquote, overseas a stagnant economy and our accelerating levels of inequality. A balanced trade policy, reducing trade deficits to zero, will, it is claimed, support lower unemployment by keeping, quote, good jobs, unquote, here, drive wages up rather than down, be more sustainable, and won't contribute to a collapse of the global economy. But there is an important truth of macroeconomics to be considered here. Quote, exports are real costs and imports are real benefits, unquote. So the issue is, would we rather send fiat money to other nations and add to our real wealth in return? Would we rather add to their real wealth and get their fiat money or our old fiat money back in return? Other things being equal, we prefer the first alternative rather than the second. Trade deficits are better than trade surpluses, at least in the short run. Other things are not equal, however, since if the government running trade deficits does nothing to compensate for their shorter and longer term effects, these will create a political reaction destabilizing any trade policy, resulting in continuous trade deficits. This is what we're looking at in relation to the Trump administration and in relation to the article we just discussed from Yanis Varoufakis. However, their negative effects can be avoided without implementing, quote, balanced trade, unquote, as a continuous policy. How that can be done is the subject of this book. It looks at trade policy in the broader context of budgetary and fiscal policy and the relations among the foreign, domestic, private, and government sectors of the economy. And since the trade balance impacts the private sector and the government balance, it argues for an integrated view of trade and fiscal policy in relation to public purpose, and also proposes changes to government institutions to facilitate integrated trade and fiscal policy. The book analyzes and critiques free trade policy, balanced trade policy, including Warren Buffett's proposal, three types of fair trade policy: trade for public purpose policy, impact assessment for trade policy, balanced budget fiscal policy, deficit neutrality in the long run fiscal policy, budgeting for public purpose fiscal policy, a holistic approach to trade and fiscal policy, and a critique of the current trade deals. Those were the trade deals of the Obama administration, actually. Finally, the concluding chapter presents the book's many conclusions, including some about the pending trade deals being negotiated by the Obama administration, and an agenda relating fiscal and trade policies to public purpose. That agenda calls for much larger levels of deficit spending by the federal government than we have now. Again, this was circa 2015. And it contends that continuous budget deficits are both necessary and desirable for the foreseeable future. So what this book has to say is in direct opposition to Trump's turning to tariffs to try to somehow balance, to somehow create a more favorable environment for jobs in this country. What can create jobs in this country is budget deficits target at the right things by the federal government. The larger the trade deficit, the larger the budget deficit should be to counterbalance it. And as a general rule, the budget deficit should be at least as large as the trade deficit, and should be larger also, because it has to compensate for domestic savings, okay, and other leakages, okay, of money out of the day-to-day economic transactions. So I wanted to point to that book to tell people that, okay, I'd written it, and to tell them that it's an enormously interesting book, if I do say so myself, and it will give you an entirely different picture on trade than what you're getting from the Trump administration, and even an entirely different picture than what you got from the Yanis Varoufakis article. So any comments on that, D?
I think that's a great idea for you to start talking about your different books that you have there to so people can become, more familiar with what's going on.
Yeah, I thought that book was particularly interesting from the international relations point of view, but I didn't want to do too much of that because, frankly, uh, the international relations issues are so important at this point that it must be weeks, since I've done a domestic policy show. I've been meaning to do something on a piece that was written by Ellen Brown about deficit spending and getting rid of the debt, because while she had many good thoughts in that piece, it was really off the mark uh, in some of the key aspects of what she was recommending. The only problem is I find myself without incentive to be discussing domestic policy right now, because the impact of errors in foreign policy can be so great, and on all of us. And we're seeing errors in foreign policy all around us. The Middle East, of course, is in total turmoil. The Ukrainian war is not over. There are risks of escalation to nuclear war in both of these theaters. And we just have to talk about what's going on in these areas so we can avoid, nuclear war, but also so we can stop, the genocide in Gaza, because that genocide is just unacceptable and cannot go on any longer. So for that reason, I can't really bring myself, to discuss domestic issues. I have, limited bandwidth each week.
Hmm.
Even with my appearances on your shows. Okay, and but my own three shows, I'm probably spending something like 12 hours a week in front of the camera, and it's I have to do other things also. And as you know, I prepare my shows. I don't do everything off the top of my head, so that takes time as well. Anyway, it's 11:13. I think it's time to say goodnight, unless you have something to add, Dee.
No, I think it's a good idea to say goodnight, and we'll see what tomorrow brings us.
Okay, good night, everybody. Please like, share, and subscribe. Please try to spread this one around. I think it was an important one. And our attendance was fairly low tonight at 27, far low. Our recent average has been in the 50s, with many shows, way above that. So it was good to see some old friends here tonight.
Yes, I love seeing old friends.
Uh, Certainly good. But I think the number of our attendees on Twitter shrunk tonight for some reason.
Mhm.
So there is that. Anyway,
Good night and good night, Bonnie.
okay. Please have a very good night. I think. Will you be back tomorrow night, Dee?
Yes, I'll be on tomorrow.
Okay. You
9
want to say anything about that
9:15.
show? You'll be on.
9:15 p.m. Eastern time, and I think it's just what basically what's been happening. We'll see what tomorrow brings.
Okay, just the news then tomorrow night.
Yeah. Yes.
Okay, I'll be back on Thursday night, okay, at 8 o'clock, and I'll be joining Dee for her show on Thursday night, okay, as well. And so uh, uh, we will both be active together
Yes.
Thursday night.
Okay. Let's just you know keep sharing information, like you said, sharing and sharing and sharing. It's so important for people to understand what's going on because the Western media does not let people know what's going on. They
Yes,
don't get a clear picture.
they don't get a clear picture. And the two foreign policy articles, the three foreign policy articles we went over today, uh, I mean, news like this doesn't appear in, the Western literature.
No.
Just not there. Okay, good night, Dee, and thank you so much for joining me.
You're welcome. Good night.